Thanks, Phil. My name's Philo. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. See some familiar faces. Nice to see y'all. And my sobriety is January 4th of 1987. So I'm a little over 34 years sober. And if you're new and you're thinking that's unfathomable, I'm thinking it's unfathomable to me that an alcoholic of my type and kind could put together 34 minutes of sobriety, much less 34 days or weeks. So 34 years is kind of beyond the ability of my brain to comprehend that this is actually still going on. And the only way we get to keep this is by giving it away. So thanks, Phil, for asking me to come and share my experience, strength, and hope. I have some today, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I was new, they told me that I owe AA a debt. And the way that I get to pay that back is by being of service. And then they said, so go put away those chairs. And I thought, well, okay, I'll put those chairs away and I'll get my debt paid off. And the problem seems to be that the debt just continues to grow, right, Tony? Because it's like, 34 years later and I'm still staying sober. So it's like, I say yes whenever I'm asked to do anything in AA, just like sober Linda. And I'm happy to be asked because that's what we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Sober Linda? Woo woo. Anyway, good to be here in Tennessee and to have my friend Joan with me. Joan and I have been, Joan's my road dog. I'm her road dog. If we're ever asked to go anywhere, I started following her around and she started following me around and we just become the best of friends. I love Joan to death. And, when I turned 34, Joan said, well, that's a good start, because Joan's going to be 64 years sober here next month. So, 34 is a good start. And it's a question of perspective. And I was taught when I was new to stick with the winners. And I thought, Joan's a winner. I'm following her. And we've become really good friends. And that's a gift of Zoom. My home group is the Arlington group in Los Angeles, California. On Tuesdays and Thursday nights at 8 o'clock, we're on Zoom. So if you're up late and you want to come to a 1 hour, one speaker meeting like this, you can come check us out. It's a group that's wound a little too tight for its own good, which I kind of learned to appreciate in Alcoholics Anonymous is just keep it simple, don't water it down, like classic straight up AA, no frills. And there's a lot of frills in Los Angeles. I don't know if you guys know that, but in Arlington, you ain't gonna find any. So it's that's where I go. And it's good to be sober. Everything that I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, when I got here, I would have told you if you asked me, are you an alcoholic? I would have said no, which tells you just how sick I was. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have this disease that tells me I don't have this disease, but you all have a problem, so it's like I've learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I've learned here. I was speaking recently in Atlanta because I'm from a little place in Washington State. It's on the edge of the city of Seattle, and it's called White Center, Washington. Now, White Center, Washington ain't so white, and it ain't so central. And it's affectionately known as Rat City to those who live there, and home to lots of housing projects and all kinds of things that the city didn't want to deal with get dumped in White Center, Washington. And I was speaking in Atlanta, and this guy after the meeting came back and he said, Philo, I have to show you this. And it was like, what? And it was his t-shirt. And it said Rat City, Washington. And there was a big rat on it smoking a cigarette with a bottle of Jack Daniels holding the pool cue. And I thought, those are my people. Oh my gosh, you've been to my place, oh my gosh. Where did you get them? I think I have to get a Rat City, Washington t-shirt for myself because I don't have one. But I mean, it kind of tells you, there was alcoholism early on. It's like when everything was happening in Seattle, the bars in Seattle were open until midnight and the bars in White Center were open until 2. So that kind of tells you a lot about how everything transpired, where my little corner of the world, it's not a place you really want to be from. I used to have a lot of shame about it, but I don't today because, we don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I'm going to tell you all kinds of things that I would never probably share with anyone when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, at my first meeting, I was very embarrassed for the speaker. I thought, oh, that poor guy. No, it's so embarrassing. And he's telling all these terrible things about himself. Of course, I can relate to a lot of them, but I felt so embarrassed for him. But if you're new, please do not be embarrassed for me. There's these things called the promises in Alcoholics Anonymous. I no longer regret the past. I no longer wish to shut the door on it. And I've learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous that we get to be helpful here, not in spite of who we are or where we come from, but because of who we are and where we come from. We get to be helpful here, not in spite of all we've done, but because of all we've done. You know what I mean? And so if there's anything that you're able to get out of this today, hopefully, like Phil was reading out of the preface, it's like, hopefully you can relate to some feelings if you don't relate to my story, because my story is a little different. Most stories tend to be fun and fun with problems and then problems. And, my story is like problems. And then I think I'm having fun. And then it just gets really sad. So, my story may not be quite like yours. I'm from a family with all kinds of abuse and down both sides. You can check all the boxes numerous times. I'm from a family of mental illness and suicide. I'm from a family of alcoholics. Both my parents were raised in single parent alcoholic homes. My mother's grandfather lived with us for years growing up, and he would sit at the kitchen table with a can of Coors beer on that table from the moment he woke up in the morning to the moment he went to bed. And I'd come by and I'd hold that can of Coors beer and I'd be like, it's still cold, Grandpa. And he'd be like, I know, it's magic. And I thought, ooh, I can't wait till I'm old enough to grow up and have a magic can of Coors beer, Grandpa. And it's like, And on the weekends, we would get in the car and have to go find Grandpa because on Saturday nights, he'd hit the hard stuff, and it would end up in a variety of different places. And we, come on, roll down the window, kids. It looks like he soiled himself, but like, get in the car, Grandpa, and it was just like, was this alcoholism? I don't know. Was this normal? This is just my family, Meanwhile, on my dad's side, his mom lived in Port Angeles, Washington. And we got on a ferry boat and we went across the sound and drove for a couple hours, and we get to her house and we're going to go see Grandma, and, and woo, I'm excited to see Grandma. And, we get there and we ring the doorbell and nobody comes to the door. And then, so we look through the picture window and it's like, oh, there she is, but the problem is that she's too drunk to get out of her chair to come answer the door. So she's crying and my dad's screaming at her, you knew we were coming, and it's like, ah, is this alcoholism? I don't know, it's just my grandma. My mom's like crushing cans of beer with her bare hands and throwing them in the middle of the yard and saying, bring me another. And is this alcoholism? I don't know. It's just my mom. So the point is that I'm surrounded by all kinds of stuff, and I'm surrounded by a lot of insanity, and it all seems, it's just the Hagen family. You know what I mean? It's just life on Occidental Avenue South. It's just what's going on every day. And if the cops come, well, that's just then we really had a good time. And that's just the way things were. I'm telling you all that because I don't necessarily know that it is, I don't think it really has anything to do with me becoming an alcoholic. My brother is they told me when I was new, they said, if you come from an alcoholic family, you're 60% more likely to become an alcoholic. Well, alcoholism runs down both sides of my family, so I was 120% more likely to become an alcoholic. But, I thought, it turns out that's not entirely true because my brother grew up in the same house that I did. He had the same crazy mom. All the same stuff that happened to me happened to him, and he's barely ever touched a drink. I don't think he's ever done a drug. He's just not that kind of guy. Now, he is, 380 pounds and a hoarder, but he is not an alcoholic. So if you grow up in my family, you're going to have a lot of issues, but you're not necessarily going to have alcoholism. And personally, after, some time here in Alcoholics Anonymous, boy, I'm grateful that I got the alcoholism. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like it brought me to all of you. So I don't think it had anything to do with me being an alcoholic necessarily, but it did give me a lot of excuses to drink. And I grew up with a lot of chips on my shoulder, and I grew up with a lot of resentments and a lot of rage. And, my mom was always going to kill herself, and she'd tell you that on a regular basis if it served her purpose to control the room that day. And I was trying to do everything perfectly so mom wouldn't die, and my dad's not around a lot. And when he is, he's kind of like, what are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about. So it's like you don't really necessarily want him around even when he is. And it's like, so all I'm doing is left with this crazy lady, and I'm this stressed out kid just trying to do everything perfectly. And you know what? At the age of 11, I went over to Billy Kincaid's house. It was the first of the month. So his mom had gotten her check, and she ran off to St. Bernadette's to play bingo, because that's what we do in White Center, Washington. And on her way out the door, she forgot a fifth of lime vodka, because she's a blackout drinker. She forgets a lot of things. And I'm like, your mom ain't never going to remember where that is. So let's party. So what we did was we got out a plastic punch bowl because, we're 11, and every party I'd ever had come, involved a plastic punch set. So we get out our plastic punch set, pour in a fifth of lime vodka, and I'm like, now we need something else for this punch. I was kind of thinking ice cream, but what we ended up doing was like getting a can of Squirt, because Squirt is a citrus flavored soda and lime is a citrus. So this makes sense to us because, you put things that match together when you're 11. So we pour in a can of Squirt and we stir. And this is a ratio of alcohol to mixer I would start with and appreciate right up to the very end, like just a little extra something to water it down, right? But anyway, I picked up my little plastic punch cup and I had my little sip, had a taste of it. And it's not, I speak a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous for reasons I don't always understand, but, I've yet to run into any Squirt and lime vodka drinkers. It's just not a winning combination. It's just not. And it tasted terrible, but it was almost all vodka, right? So it like kind of burned, and it kind of burned all the way down, and it hit my gut. And, my friend Father Terry, who just celebrated 50 years of sobriety here in Los Angeles, and he's a Catholic priest who had been through 27 aversion therapies, where you take a drug and then you get to drink all your favorite drinks, and then you like throw up with great enthusiasm, as he says, and it's supposed to somehow deter you from ever wanting this particular drink again. Well, he's been through 27 of those. So it's like, so I know he's a drunk that drinks like I drink, even if he is a Catholic priest. And Father Terry likes to say that his first drink was the perfect imitation of a spiritual experience. And coming from a Catholic priest, I figure that means something. Because for me, it was very much the same. My first drink was, like discovering America. It was like, whoosh, I exhaled for the first time in 11 years. You know what I'm saying? It's like I didn't have a drinking problem. I immediately had a drinking solution. Like I didn't know that things were that off and that wrong, and I was that irritable or that restless or that discontent and that uncomfortable until I had alcohol in my body, and I experienced a sense of ease and comfort that I've been looking for my whole life. And I didn't even know I needed it until I had alcohol in my body, And I was like, oh my gosh. And the more I drank, the better I felt. And the more I drank, I said, this is something I'm going to be doing as often as possible for the rest of my life. And the more I drank, if mom killed herself, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. And the more I drank, I'm blacking out. I'm a blackout drinker from the very first time I drank. It could be because my mom had me knocked out on codeine cough syrup for the first 9 years of my life. I don't know. It could be right into a lot of things. But I'm a blackout drinker from the gate. And I come out of a blackout and I'm in a fight. I'm outside and I'm in a fight. I've never been in a fight before, Sharon, but you know what? When I ingest alcohol, I may behave violently and unpredictably, just like my grandfather, right? Should have seen it coming, And the next thing I remember is I'm in the grocery store parking lot down the street, and my pants and underwear are around my ankles for reasons we're still not sure of to this day. But I do know what little bit of a reputation I may have had been ruined in a nanosecond. Some kids from school are screaming over here, and I'm like, ah! And the next thing I remember, I'm laying on a bathroom floor, puking and puking and puking. And I'm saying to myself, oh my gosh, what the hell? I'm never doing this again. Oh my gosh, I'm so sick. I'm never doing this again. And oh my God. because I behaved in ways that were embarrassing to that I didn't want to do with you, which maybe necessarily didn't bother me so much. I behaved in ways that were unacceptable to me, which I really cared about. I got really sick. Why would I ever want to do this again? But a week later, Colleen comes over to babysit. And Colleen's one of those babysitters, the ones that she's over 21 and she's taking me to the R-rated movie, rather than staying at home, And so I'm like, Colleen, you're over 21. Can you get me a fifth of lime vodka? And she's like, lime vodka? That's disgusting. Let's get you something really good. And in Washington at the time, you can only buy anything stronger than beer and wine at a Washington State liquor store. So she had to go in, and you had to be over 21 to go in. And she came in and she reeled off a bunch of names. And one of them was Southern Comfort. And I said, oh, yes, Southern Comfort. I need Southern Comfort because I need some comfort in. You know what I'm saying? That's exactly what I need. So that's what we got. And that's what's been going. That was what was going on all through junior high. And that's what was going on all through high school. It's a miracle I graduated from high school. It was a really big deal in my family to graduate from high school. Neither of my parents finished high school. My brothers, who are all older, most of them did not finish high school. So there was this big deal. Just finish high school. Can you just finish high school? Well, I finished high school, you guys. Probably with a D+ average, but I finished high school. Or maybe they just shoved me through because they didn't want me there anymore, but it's like I got through. And I ended up at the senior breakfast of all things. I don't normally even go to stuff like this, but I'm there and there's a slideshow for every student. And they're like, Kathy Gullickson. Remember when Kathy Gullickson won the Washington State debate tournament for a debate on evolution versus creationism? Oh, yes, Kathy Gullickson. Woohoo! Philo Hagen. I remember when Philo Hagen was passed out in the school parking lot and everyone parked their cars around him and no one woke him up until third period and someone in the back yelled, "Which time?" And everybody laughed. And I laughed louder than anyone because by now I have already mastered the art of never letting you know that I have a feeling about any of it or that you're ever gotten to me in any level. So I'm laughing louder, 82 Brew Crew, woo, yeah, But later on, I'm in the bathroom by myself when I'm thinking, oh my gosh, 4 years at this crappy school and that's what I'm being remembered for? 4 years, Dan? Oh my gosh, 4 years. And there's something wrong with my drinking. Gosh, there's something really wrong with my drinking. So if you're new and you've had a moment of clarity about your drinking, congratulations. I have them all the time. The problem with it is that I'm unable to hold on to that information when I need it the most. In fact, I'm sitting alone in a bathroom stall and I'm kind of thinking, boy, I really need to do something about this. But by the time I come out of the bathroom stall, Tony Astonelli's like, hey, there's a kegger at Arlene's tonight. And I'm like, woo, kegger at Arlene's, so it's like, I'm unable to hold on to that information when I ate the most. I have a sponsee who relapsed again not terribly long ago. And he was like, Philo, that was a great relapse. And I'm like, ooh, good. Tell me more. And he's like, well, I really got that I'm an alcoholic this time. And I'm like, well, that's good or not. Good. Our bookie says, not sure you're an alcoholic. Why not step over to the nearest bar room and practice some controlled drinking? It might be worth a bad case of the jitters to get a full knowledge of your condition. So that's good. That's really good. You finally got a full knowledge of your condition. That sounds like a great relapse. But the problem, honey, is this is the 5th time you've gotten a full nature of your condition since I've been sponsoring you. And you've had a full knowledge of your condition, I'm sure, probably. How long was he sponsoring you? For 2 years? It's like, I'm one of those people that I'm unable to recall this information when I need it the most. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I saw the second step and I was like about being restored to sanity, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to be restored to sanity because I came to AA out of a mental health psych ward. I had been strapped to a bed, 5150, and I kept to AA. They sent me to Alcoholics Anonymous and I was like, yes, I need to be restored to some sanity. But that's not the kind of sanity we're talking about in AA. It's not the kind of crazy we're talking about in AA. The kind of crazy we're talking about in AA is this insanity of picking up the first drink, right? You know, I love in the beginning of our book, it says, we are people left to our own devices who are unable to stop ourselves from putting our hands on a hot stove. You know, it won't burn me this time. And here's how. You know what? Because I'm hanging out with Dawn tonight. Dawn and I are good friends. We're going to have a good time. Dawn's cool. Things don't get too crazy when I'm hanging out with Dawn, because when I'm hanging out with Jim, you know, things get a little nuts when Jim and I get together. But I'm hanging out with Dawn. I'm not hanging out with Jim. It's going to be okay. And, you know, Don and I went and we had a whole plate of Mexican food tonight. You know what I mean? We had a whole lot of enchiladas and rice and beans. Our stomachs full. We ain't drinking on an empty stomach like last time. We got a full stomach and we're sticking to tequila. We're not going to have red wine. Like, we're not going to mix the red wine in. We're not going to mix the red wine in, because you know that's why everything went to hell last time. It was the mixing. That had to be what you couldn't have. So we're sticking with the tequila. We're not mixing the red wine. I'm hanging out with Don, and it burned me again, you know, and it burns me every single time. But I think somehow it's not going to happen. But eventually, I think you can also get to a whole level of insanity that I got to, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, where it's like, you know, it isn't going to be any different. You know you're going to lose that job you just got a few days ago, where they're already telling you, if you're late one more time, we're going to have to let you go. And it's like, but you know, God, I really want to go out tonight. You know, it's Thursday. Because, you know, Thursday's a really big night to go out. You know, got to see my friends. It's Thursday. Like, oh, but if I go out, I'm going to lose that job. But, you know, got to go. And somehow, like, you know, being able to pay my bills or have a little love in my life or whatever, or have things in life that are normal for normal people, somehow just don't seem as important to me as a liquid. You know? Boy, that's a whole other level of insanity, isn't it? And then you can get to another level of insanity our book talks about, where you're just going beyond human aid. That's my experience, where I'm coming to on a regular basis, saying, oh my God, not again. Oh my God, who is this? Where am I? What's happening? How did I get here? Oh, no, not again. I'm not doing this again. But by 3:00 in the afternoon, I'm at Ozzy's Cocktail Lounge and I'm drunk off my ass again. And I'm not even talking myself into it or out of it anymore. It's just at some point I get up from wherever I am and I step into my day, and my brain steps into an alternative universe where that conversation never even happened. Or even if it did, I'm completely unable to access that information when I need it the most. It's like alcoholism is a terrible disease. It's a terrible disease. And for me, it was really an awful, awful, awful thing. You know, we moved out the day after I graduated from high school and got an apartment downtown, so no one could stand in the way of my drinking anymore, right? You know, it's like, I'm gone. I'm moving out. And we held on to that apartment for about 4 months, right, Joan? I think it was about 4 months. And 4 months was pretty good, I thought, you know, because it's like people really want their share of the electricity and they want their rent. And, you know, my money all disappeared because I have a fake ID, even though I'm 18, you know, even though it says I'm 6'4" and, you know, and 28 years old. But if you kind of look really closely in the dark, you don't notice these things. Anyway, you know, so we went to the bar last night and I had the money in my pocket, and I don't, you know, for rent, and I don't know where it all went. I certainly couldn't have drank it all, right, Albert? I don't know where it went. So maybe I was mugged. Oh, right, that's what happened. I was mugged, Carol. It was terrible. I was mugged. I think there was 2. No, wait, there was 4 of them. And on the way home, they mugged me, and it was awful. And like, oh my gosh. And then, you know, because we have to tell a lot of lies to keep the alcoholism train rolling. And the weirdest thing about these lies is that the person that believes them the most is me. Like, I really believe this stuff that I just made up in my head 5 minutes ago to get myself out of a jam. But if you question me on this, I will either fight you or I will just write you off for the rest of my life because this terrible thing happened to me and I was mugged and you don't even care and you don't understand. Like, oh my God, you know. And this is how my life is going. And then, you know, age of 18, I end up on the streets because I have nowhere else to go. And I'm certainly not going back to those crazy people. You know, how bad can it be? And there's kids breaking into cars. And I'm like, that doesn't seem like something I really want to do. But a week later, I see a kid break into a car and he breaks in without breaking the glass. You know, and I have an open-mindedness. I have willingness. I had it all the time when I was out there. I have an open mind. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to do something different. Who says that these are only valuable in sobriety, you know? Excuse me, sir. how did you break into that car without breaking the glass? You know, it's like, I'm willing to do some things. I'm an alcoholic of a type and kind who draws a line in the sand. And I say to myself, you know, if it ever gets this bad, I am done. And then I would get that bad and I'd be like, you know what, Lorianne? I really think I was overreacting on that one, don't you? Oh, let's draw that line further out, right? You know, let's draw that line just a little further out. But eventually, if it does get that bad, you know, who cares? Because if I'm just staying loaded, who cares? And that's the story of my alcoholism, you know? There's these kids in front of J.C. Penney's at Second and Pike who are hopping in cars and having sex with strangers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be one of those kids. Those kids are really sad. And then about 2.5 months later, on a really rainy night when I'm out of money and I'm broke and it's cold and I'm really thirsty. You know what it's like when you're really thirsty? When you're like really thirsty. Oh my gosh. And my head's just like, oh gosh, I need a drink. I need a drink. I need a drink. I need a drink. How bad can it be? How bad can it be? How bad can it be? And the answer is it can be pretty freaking bad, you guys. Boy, I sure need a drink after that. Whew. Then once I start drinking, you know, I can't seem to stop, and then my money disappears. And so I guess I got to hop in another car with another stranger and have sex with them so that I can get money so that I can drink over hopping in cars with strangers and having sex with them so I can get money to do this so that I can drink over this. And this is my life. You know, what's our book say about living to drink and drinking to live? It's like, that's the story of my last several years. And I became an animal with latent human tendencies out there, you guys. There is things that have happened to me that have literally scarred me for life. There's things out there that have, you know, whoo, but you know what? Not one single thing hasn't turned out to be something of value in helping another alcoholic stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Not one single thing hasn't been something that's shown up on somebody's fifth step and they're like, oh my God, Philo, I really don't want to tell you this. And I'm like, come on, you know I got baggage. You know you can tell me. And they do inevitably. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry that happened to you. That should not have to happen to anybody. But you know what? I have a couple stories just like it. And guess what? We don't have to drink over that today. And we can recover from that today. You know, every single thing has turned out to be something of value in helping somebody stay sober in AA. You know, there was a day out there near the end where I was like, oh my gosh, how long is this going on? And I ended up saying a little prayer. And I was like, God, how much longer is this going to be going on? And why am I not dead yet? And I heard this voice. And this voice said, your story isn't finished yet, and you're going to need it because you're going to be telling it to a lot of people. No, I didn't know I'd be telling it in Kingsport, Tennessee on a Saturday in 2021 or anywhere else that I've told it. But apparently all of this may have been something that, you know, my higher power wanted to have happen so that I could have something to help other alcoholics stay sober. I don't know. And maybe that's the case for all of you. Like maybe your dark past is be your greatest asset. Maybe everything that happened to you is going to be something that's going to be something of value in helping somebody else. And in a weird way, maybe it was all meant to happen in some weird way. Who can say? I don't know, but I do know that like, Alcoholics Anonymous is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. You know, on January 3rd of 1987, I was running down Broadway at 3:33 in the morning, according to the police report, you know, picked up by the police wearing no shoes and no shirt, screaming at people in 40-degree weather in the pouring rain. I guess I must have been in danger to myself or others because in this particular situation, I came to strapped to a bed at Harborview Hospital and this nurse asked me a bunch of questions. And then you know what she said? She said, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you, Philo. And I got kind of excited, Albert. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I'm going to finally find out what's wrong with me. Like, I know there's something wrong with me. I don't know exactly what's it going to be, right? You know, it's like, ooh, I bet it's going to be good. And what she says is, Philo, your problem is that you're a chronic alcoholic. And I'm like, how dare you, lady? You know what I mean? Like, I got real problems. And that is certainly not even on the list, like I got real, like, because I'd rather be a whore. I'd rather be criminally insane. I'd rather, you got a good, like anything, you got something better than that. Like, because that, otherwise I'd just be an alcoholic. And if I'm an alcoholic, then I can't drink. And if you can't drink, how are you supposed to get through the day? And she says, well, we'll send you this assessment appointment. If they say you're not an alcoholic, we'll give you some help. And so they put me on a short bus and they whisked me across town. And I spent 90 minutes of a 30-minute appointment arguing with this woman about how, she kept saying weird things to me like, Philo, 8 or 9 double kamikazes is not social drinking. And I'd be like, why? Because you don't have any friends? Just look at you. Who would want to be friends with you? I have real friends at Ozzy's I know where my friends are. Ozzy's Cocktail Lounge was a seniors bar, a very alcoholic seniors bar. My friends weren't people my own age because the people my own age had long since quit putting up with me. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but somehow I was still mildly amusing at a dive bar called Ozzy's Cocktail Lounge full of people over. So, I have real friends, lady, but everybody that tried to help me prior to coming to AA was met with nothing but animosity and hostility and sometimes rage until somebody carried a message of depth and weight to me that nobody had ever carried to me before. But this thing happened while talking to this woman. I heard this voice again. And this voice, is it possible you're so nuts you don't even know you're an alcoholic? And I said, ooh, and that could make sense. So I said, is it possible I'm so crazy I don't even know I'm an alcoholic? And she said, yes, sign here. And I signed, and they started sending me to you. What a gift, right? Didn't seem like one at the time. Boy, this is not where I wanted to go. But boy, it tells you I have a thinking problem, that the thing that would be the greatest thing in my life was something I didn't even want, They started sending me to Alcoholics Anonymous. We go every day to the noon meeting. And back in 1987 in Seattle, Washington, there were a lot of characters at the noon meeting. They all had funny names. Like there was Cowboy Tom, who always wore the hat, Fat Joe, which I always thought was kind of rude. Like, why do we have to call him Fat Joe? Like, I never saw another Joe, but it was like, Fat Joe. And there was Irish Annie, who was like very ginger. So it was pretty obvious she was Irish. I don't know why we have to keep pointing that out, but it's like Irish Annie and Big Book Robert, who always wore the smelly poncho. And there was, and there was Directions Doug. And Directions Doug got his name because he would say the exact same thing at every single meeting I saw him at, which was every day at noon. And back then, all his meetings in Seattle, a lot of them to this day are 90 minutes long, and they're topic discussion meetings. There are no speaker meetings like this. Someone throws out a topic and you share on the topic for 90 minutes, right? And Directions Doug was there. So if you saw his hand up, you knew you were in trouble. And there were no timers in 1987. So if he knew he could go on for 5 or 10 minutes, and sometimes he would. And so he would say this, and he was from somewhere in the South, and he always said this. He'd say, my name's Doug, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm here to tell you all about the directions here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the directions are you go to meetings. You don't drink or use between these meetings. You get a sponsor, you call that sponsor. You get a big book, you read your big book. And if all else fails, you follow these directions, Tim, which is you go to meetings. You don't drink or use between these meetings. You get a sponsor, you call that sponsor. You get a big book, you read your big book. And then if all else fails, why don't you follow these directions, which are you go to meetings. You don't drink or use between these meetings. So I attacked him in the kitchen. You know what I mean? And you know how we all love a little drama in Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, oh, there's a newcomer attacking Doug. Let's watch, right? So everyone's gathering around because I'm screaming at him like, we know the directions. Will you shut up? And he's like, ooh, hey, everyone, Philo knows what the directions are. Let's see. Philo, you're still coming with the kids from lockup, right? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, I guess we won't worry about that first part then, will we? Do you have a sponsor? And I said, no. And he said, I guess you're not calling that sponsor either, are you? And I said, well, I guess not. He said, well, do you have a big book? And I said, well, yes, they gave me one. He's like, have you even opened it, Philo? And I'm like, no. And he's like, all right, everyone. Philo knows what the directions are in AA. But Philo ain't doing any of them, so what good is it that Philo knows what the directions are? Because Alcoholics Anonymous is not a program of knowing, it's not a program of thinking, it's a program of doing, it's a program of action. And I'll make a deal with you, Philo, he said. If you're willing to start doing these actions, I'll stop sharing about the directions in Alcoholics Anonymous. And everyone's eyes got wide, like I'd been given the key to save us all. Like, please, Philo, please. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And everyone cheered. Yay! Ooh. And the next day he was there and he was sharing about the directions, and I bolted for the door because my MO is always, well, if you hurt me or piss me off, watch me hurt me, and then you are really going to suffer, which makes no logical sense whatsoever. But as I was bolting for the door, this hand came out of nowhere, and it was this, 6'2", 380-pound Native American woman named Tiny. She grabbed me by the back of the neck and she slammed me in the chair next to her and she said, don't you leave. We're talking after the meeting. And I was like, you're right, Tiny, you're right. And we're talking after the meeting. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to sit right here. And afterwards, she said, Philo, I'm worried about you. And I was like, whoa, been a long time since anybody said they were worried about me. Says, Philo, I'm worried about you because you're so smart, kid. I'm worried you might think your way right out of Alcoholics Anonymous because you have to be stupid to believe that showing up here for an hour, 90 minutes, saying a little prayer, doing a little writing could change your life beyond your wildest dreams. Gosh, you'd have to be stupid to believe that. But she said, the next time you're outside and the wind's blowing and that hole inside you that's been there maybe your whole life, I don't know, maybe it got bigger over time. I don't know, as a result of everything that's happened. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it's going. She said, but next time you're outside and that wind blows right through you, I hope you're stupid enough to believe that Alcoholics Anonymous can fill that hole back up. It's just because it has for me. And I knew exactly what she was talking about. And for some reason I said, tell me about your drinking, lady, And here's this woman I have nothing in common with. And she says, Philo, I got this problem called the phenomenon of craving. And what it looks like is once I put alcohol in my body, this thing goes off. It's just like more, and it becomes louder and more important than everything in my life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. She said, Philo, I got this mental obsession too, where I can have a can of beer in my hand and start to feel a sense of ease and comfort. I don't even have to drink it yet. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the more she talked about alcoholism, the more I realized, oh my God, Tiny, I'm an alcoholic. And she said, we know. Newsflash to the world, Philo has finally realized something that's been obvious to everyone since probably junior high school, but it was never obvious to me. And I said, what am I going to do, Tiny? And she said, why don't you do what you told Doug you were going to do yesterday? And I was like, okay, well, will you sponsor me? And she said, no. But standing right behind her was Ed. And Ed said, I'll sponsor you, kid. And when I got out, he said, you're going to go to the noon meeting, the 5:30 meeting, and the 8 o'clock meeting. And then we're going to go to the International House of Pancakes. And I'm like, no, when I get out, I got things to do. And he said, right, like go to the noon meeting, the 5:30 meeting, the 8 o'clock meeting, and we're going to go to the International House of Pancakes. And I was like, no, apparently you ain't listening, Ed. He's like, no, parent. Oh, that's right, Philo. You're so special. We're going to create a whole new program just for you, where you only have to go to meetings on the days and nights of the week where you drank. And I'm like, well, finally, somebody's listening to me. Well, wait a minute. I drink all the time. And he said, that's right. And you're going to the noon meeting, the 5:30 meeting, and the 8 o'clock meeting. Sometimes other people came with it, and he called it fellowship. But mostly it was just us and this blue book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And we would go through this book line by line, a little at a time. And he'd say, do you know what this word means, Philo? And I'd be like, yeah. He said, what's it mean? I'd say, I have no idea, because it's like I got all the answers, but I don't even know what the questions are. And so he'd get out a dictionary and we'd have to look it up, and so because he says, I really want you to know what this book is talking about. It was written in 1939, so it's important sometimes to look up the word and get a bigger context of stuff, and not just, sometimes words are a little different than they were then, and that's what we would do. And we'd go through this thing, and whenever I questioned him on anything, he would always turn back to the beginning, and he'd say, no, remember, Philo, it says here the purpose of this book is to show us precisely how to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. What does the word precisely mean to you? Be like exactly. And he'd be like, that's right. That's why we're doing exactly what's outlined in this book. And that's exactly what we did, It's exactly what we did. There's nothing special about me whatsoever, other than somebody cared enough to take time out in their life to sit down with me almost every night for months and take me through this book and cared enough to make sure that I understood what it said so that I could have recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I just didn't think it was seemingly. I thought it was truly hopeless, you know? So if you're feeling hopeless, guess what? It's only seemingly hopeless. What a gift, right? Because this stuff happens as a result of work in the book. There's promises in every step, you know? There's promises in every step. And this thing happens where we go from like being unable to like stop ourselves from putting our hands on a hot stove to like, whoosh, you can work these steps as outlined in this book. And then we get to this thing called the 9th step, the 10th step promises, which are after the 9th step promises. There's 10th step promises, you know, which are even more amazing in my opinion. I mean, the 9th step promises are extravagant indeed, right? But the 10th step promises, woo, you know, we will now recoil from alcohol as if it were a hot flame. We couldn't seem to drink even if we wanted to, you know. We've been placed in a position of neutrality. We are no longer, it's like by now we have returned to sanity. Like what kind of magic, what kind of mojo happens as a result of working these steps as outlined in this book, right? You know, the 9th step's really important. I think it's like that's where a lot of it really starts. The magic really starts in this 9th step in my experience, because, you know, Ed said, you're going to make amends to Kelly. And I was like, you're an idiot, Ed. I haven't even seen Kelly in a year and a half. And he said, but he's the one you want to do the least, right? And I said, yeah. He said, we're going to start with him. He said, why don't you say a prayer about it? And I'm like, you and your prayers. Okay. I'm willing to make amends to this guy. Bring it on. Because, you know, Kelly had tried to kill me a couple of different times, you know, or when it's like he like, you know, there was that time he strangled me on 2nd Street. There's a time, I mean, there's a read, you know, but when I put pen to paper during my 4th step, I got to get to this 4th column of the 4th step where it turned out there was reasons why he tried to kill me a couple of different times. I kind of conveniently forgot about. So I had some things to make amends for. And I was like, okay, I'm willing to make amends. Bring it on. And the next day, I'm riding my bicycle to Freeway Park and I get this feeling like, no, go to Volunteer Park. And I'm like, no, I'm going to Freeway Park. And I keep riding, but the voice gets louder. No, go to Volunteer Park. And I'm like, okay, who am I arguing with? And I take my bike that somebody gave me and I ride to Volunteer Park. I get to Volunteer Park. It's a beautiful day in Seattle. So I'm laying out in the sun amidst all these people, you know, and an hour and a half later, I get this feeling like sit up. And I sit up and there's Kelly doing a beeline for me through this crowd. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Kelly. And his face got red. And I said, no, please, can I talk to you? I need to make this situation right. Because I'm sorry, but I'm sorry is not an amends. You know, I was saying I was sorry all the time and my behavior wasn't changing in any way, shape, or form. So I had to make this situation right. Can I talk to you? Can I sit down? Can I cop to like everything that I've done, everything that is my part? Ask you what there is that I might be forgetting and listen to how I may have hurt you, you know, and just listen and not defend myself while it's going on. And then ask you what I can do to make this situation right. That's what I was doing. And this crazy thing happened, you guys, where the person I hated the most, the person that I said, boy, if I ever have a gun in my hand and I see him, he'd be dead and I wouldn't have a feeling about it. Boy, all that hatred that I had disappeared. And he never made amends for trying to kill me. He never made amends for anything that had to do with his side of the street. But whatever that I did, cleaned up my side of the street, and I get to be a little more happier, a little more joyous, and a little more free. We do this work and these crazy things happen where we get to finally be who we always were meant to be. We get to shine in ways we never realized we could shine. We get to have gifts we never could have imagined, you know? So true for me. 3 years sober after finishing my amends, I thought, you know what? I'm getting as far away from this crazy family as I can, and I moved. Kids who come from where I come from do not get to go anywhere. But it's like 3 years sober, I'm moving to California. Woo, woo, woo. Okay, it's not that far from Washington, but you know, for me, it was a really long ways, right? Then I'm ending up in San Francisco, and someone said, hey, look up Suzanne Wally. We went to rehab together. You should find her, you know. She might be a good sponsor for you. You know, I said, okay, I'll look her up. So when I get to San Francisco, I follow direction. I look up Suzanne Wally. I knock on the door. Hey, the door opens and it's like cigarettes and cats. You know that smell? Like lots of cigarettes and cats. And I'm like, woo, and then I go on in and like her and her partner are fighting and fighting and fighting the whole time I'm there and ignoring me. And about after 30 minutes, I'm thinking, this is not a vision for me. I'm going to quietly make my exit. And I'm 3 years sober. I can sponsor myself, right? Because, like I'm doing pretty good. I'm in a whole new state, the whole new world. I'm going to do really good. And I started doing pretty good. Sharon's just shaking her head. I love it, because it's like, I started temping and they hired me. Woo, I got a great job at a law firm, me. And then I fell in love. Oh my gosh, I fell in love, Linda. It was amazing. I'd never been in love like this before. But by the time that year was over, I'd not only been fired from that job, I'd been escorted from the building by security. You know what I'm saying? And it's like in that relationship that it was the biggest thing that ever happened in my life. Oh my gosh, it went up in flames. Not the kind of flames that just hurt the two of us, but like damage and injure people all over the place in the process. My character defects are out of control. My alcoholism is untreated all over again. It's like if I'm not doing this work, it's like it's going to end up, I'm in trouble. And I end up, I get a noon meeting, dumping in a meeting, and somebody taps on my shoulder and says, Philo, can I buy you lunch? And it's Suzanne Wally. I said, sure, you can buy me lunch. So he'd buy me lunch. He said, are you still looking for a sponsor? And I said, I guess I need one. And she said, I guess you do too. And I'd be happy to work with you. And for the next 17 years, I got to have Suzanne Wally sponsor me. And she cheerleaded for me like nobody had cheerleaded for me before. And she showed up for me in ways, oh my gosh, 5 years sober. She's like, what are you going to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know, go to the movies. And she said, no, your life, Philo, your whole life. Like, honestly, you guys, I never thought I was going to stay alive long enough and be sober to have a life. I never made a plan. I had zero plans. And she was the one that got me back into school. She was the one that got me graduating from a university and was cheering me on and cried like she was, like my mom. And it was like, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so grateful that, and she showed lots of tough love and good sponsorship. And I've been completely reparented in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when she got really sick, it was really tough, and eventually her cancer turned into 3 different kinds of cancer. And eventually she had a bad stroke and they wouldn't let anybody up to see her except family. So I said, let me up. She's my mom. And they said, oh, we didn't know she was your mom. So I went on up to see her, and I woke her up and I said, Suzanne, if anybody ever asks, you're my mom. And she started crying and she's like, well, I guess they'd know the truth then, wouldn't they? And she said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, kiddo, but 20 years sober, I was very dry. I hadn't been to very many meetings. I was all caught up in my job and my marriage and didn't even know I was watching and burning it all to the ground. And I ended up doing another 90 and 90, working the steps again. And I had an abortion, she says, this is an outside issue, but it's mine. And she said, and I was having so many regrets about it because there I was, unmarried, just finished menopause, was never going to have a kid. And my sponsor was like, well, you quit whining about that and go find some kid in AA who would have been about that kid's age and start giving them some love and attention the way you would have given that kid attention. And she's like, oh my gosh, he showed up a year ago and I barely gave him the time of day. So if you think you know what you're going to get out of AA, you have no idea in my experience. And these days I'm in LA managing the LA central office. Who would have thought that, right? Like getting to work, being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous and doing stuff like this. Oh my gosh, I'm just flabbergasted whenever I think about how does a kid who comes from where I come from end up where I am today? And the only answer is working the steps as outlined in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for that, I will forever be truly grateful. Thanks everybody for listening.